Welcome to People in Perspective. My name is Colin Hughes. Joining me today is 93 WXRT morning DJ and host of Lin's Bin is Lin Brehmer. Welcome to the program, Mr. Brehmer.
Thank you very much, Colin.
All right, so welcome. So to start it off, how did you get into DJ? Being a
Well,
DJ?
you know what? I never dreamed I would be a disc jockey. I went to college and took every obscure poetry course they offered. And there's a good thing there's not an English class here, because I can tell you when you graduate from college with a degree where you can show off that you took entire semesters on William Blake, the Romantic poets, William Shakespeare, there aren't too many people excited about that when it comes to job opportunities. I thought maybe I'd be an English teacher, actually, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. But I had done college radio in college, strangely enough, and it was so much fun. I grew up listening to radio. I grew up listening to the very first FM radio stations in New York City. You know, I'd be in high school, I'd be up late at night reading or strumming guitar, but I'd almost always have this station on the radio. And the great thing about the early days of FM radio is they played everything. You know, they played Black Sabbath, but they also played Joni Mitchell. It was kind of a wide spectrum of music. And I think that influenced me a great deal. And I got talked into doing college radio my sophomore year. And it was just a blast, you know. I sat around and played music for people.
Yeah, so you did college radio. How did you make the transition from college radio to becoming professional?
That's an excellent question. I got out of college, and one of the things that college kids often do is they move in back with their parents because it's hard to get a job, they don't know what to do. I took it a level lower and moved in with a friend's parents.
Woo!
Yeah, it sounds pathetic. It actually was. What happened was I sent tapes and resumes all over the Northeast, because that's where I was living at the time, and you know, sent a tape and a resume, and I got no answers at all except for two stations. One station in Lewiston, Auburn, Maine said we have no openings at present and expect none in the future. Like, none in the future?
So they sent you a job opportunity for jobs that didn't exist.
Correct. But one guy made the mistake of saying we'd be happy to consider you for part-time or fill-in work if you were a local resident. So I loaded up my 1976 metallic green Ford Pinto station wagon, one of the exploding models.
Oh.
And I got rear-ended a couple times. I never blew up. And drove up to Albany, New York, where this guy had said this, and just looked for the radio tower. I kind of knew where it was, and drove up, walked in the door, and said, yeah, I'd like to talk to the program director, Jack Hopke. And let me just tell everybody that that's a terrible way to approach a job, because they say, I'm sorry, they're busy right now, they can't talk to you. But I think this guy was so taken aback that somebody had driven up and walked in the door and asked to see him that he sat me down, he talked to me for a while. Next thing I know, he's offering me a job 1 day a week, Sunday mornings. It was January 16th, 1977 was my first radio show where they actually paid me, I think, minimum wage.
So where did you go after that?
Well, I worked in Albany, paid some serious dues, had a wonderful time. You know, you start out as like an overnight disc jockey when you get your first full-time job. I was part-time for a few years. Midnight to 6, Monday through Saturday.
Wow.
I'd go home and be so tired I'd have to turn on reruns of the Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres just to kind of recover my sanity. And I worked there for a long time and got a big break in 1984 to come work at WXRT, but it wasn't as a disc jockey. I'd been a DJ in Albany. This was to be the music director. Now, the music director at a station like XRT is the guy who decides what bands, what songs, what music winds up in the library. My job is to deal with the band manager, the bands, the record companies, and also the program director, who's the real boss. He can say, you're out of your mind, you're nuts. Mm-hmm. But, you know, people would say, well, what does that mean, music director? I would always say, well, all I have to do is change the course of musical history on a daily basis. So I did that for 6 years. Now, the only way you get a raise in radio is to leave and try to come back. So I got a job offer in Minneapolis in 1990. I said, I got this job offer. It's for a lot more money. I may have to take it. And XRT would say, oh, you're not going to leave. Go, no, really, I will leave. I will take off for more money up in Minneapolis. It's a better job. And they call your bluff. So I was forced to move to Minneapolis. I was there for a year. I had a great time. I was the program director, so I was the boss. But I realized that given the chance to drive the bus, I really preferred sitting in the back of the bus throwing spitballs at people. So when XRT called later the same year and said, we're thinking we'd love you to come back and take over the morning show, I lied and said, I'm very happy up here. I'm not sure I can break the friendships I've made. Well, I completely caved and came rushing back to XRT. So with that exception of a year in Minneapolis, I've been at XRT for 28 years. And I've been doing the morning show for 20 years.
Yeah, you just had a big celebration for the 20th year thing.
Yeah, you know what, at a certain point they can no longer ignore how long you've been there. They have to say, we should really, do a party or a celebration. So we did a live broadcast, and the Chicago Tribune did a great article on 20 years. 20 years at a radio station is highly unusual. 20 years doing a morning show is mostly unheard of, especially these days.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about your past, like high school.
Uh-huh.
You
don't have any pictures of that, do you?
No,
Okay.
Unfortunately we don't. But who were you in high school?
I was the flaky jock. I was the, it's just you and me talking, I don't want this repeated out of here. Mm-hmm. I was the kind of guy that would burst into last period advanced placement English before swim practice. And I would have pulled up a Speedo over my pants and put on a bathing cap and goggles and wrapped a towel around my neck, and without even an invitation, go rushing in, jump on the table in front of the teacher in the class and say, I've come to save you all. That's who I was in high school. Kind of quiet, shy, retiring, temperate, moderate. I was very good in the humanities and English and in physics and some of the mathematics. After trigonometry, I was completely lost. I was affable. I was the starting pitcher for the high school baseball team, freshman through senior year. So I always thought that I was going to be a professional baseball player, except for the fact that I wasn't even close to having a chance of doing that. But I was obsessed with baseball, and so I kind of was in a couple different factions, sports and some of the nerdy literary types. I shouldn't tell you what I used to do for fun with my friend David Golden and Dean Schwartz and some of the other guys. This is true, and don't repeat this. Some people play trivia games. We would sit around with the Oxford Anthology of Poetry, and one of us would read a passage. We go, okay, century, influence, author, see how far we could go,
Wow, that's impressive.
Nerdy, that's what it is. You know what it is? As my news anchor would call it, nerdalicious.
Nerdalicious. Well, we're gonna have to coin that phrase.
It's all yours.
All right. So, who was your favorite teacher in high school?
Oh, that's easy. Mr. McCaffrey. He was actually a recent Harvard graduate, very young guy, must have been in his mid-late 20s, and he was our AP English teacher. And he kind of got me, if a teacher can get you. And I think of him all the time. In fact, I got in touch with him like a year or two ago and, kind of said, I don't know if you remember me, blah, blah, blah. And then he emailed back and said, do I remember you? And then he recounted stories like me jumping on his table and stuff like that. And I recently looked at some old report cards, and the stuff he wrote about me, I wish I could publish, because it's the nicest stuff anybody's ever said about me. But there was also an English teacher that punished us in 10th grade because he was at us, and he forced us to read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And it was supposed to be a punishment. We had to write something about it, and it changed my life. I was so enamored of that poem, Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table, that I became a fan of English literature.
All right. Well, we'll be right back here on People in Perspective. Hello. Welcome back to People in Perspective. My name is Colin Hughes. Today we have Lin Brehmer, morning DJ on 93 WXRT. All right, so going back into our previous conversation.
Yes.
I want to break out some photos that we have.
Those are classics. That, of course, the sunny disposition of a young Lin Brehmer, dressed in the very rarely seen madras jacket with knobby knees. I don't know what my parents were thinking about in those shorts. You have to understand, before Michael Jordan, people would wear shorts that were very short. This is my evil brother David, and he's always acknowledged that he is evil. You can tell he's got a little Band-Aid there. I especially like the dark socks and the shorts combination. It's not a combination you see with most people under the age of 80. And David's having a little trouble. This is actually in Red Hook, New York. And my son, coincidentally, is now going to college in the town of Red Hook, New York.
Nice. All right. Next
Weird
photo.
but true. Okay, go ahead.
All right, let's see. What do we got?
Okay, this is a good story. I was
Oh, maybe you should say who this is for.
Oh, these are Talking Heads in 1977. Their first tour outside of New York City. This was in Albany, New York, at a record store called Just a Song. And when you're a part-time DJ, you do whatever you can to make a living, in addition to working once or twice a week doing a radio show. So I had jobs like I was a condominium village lifeguard, which was hilarious. And I worked in a record store. If you've ever seen High Fidelity, that was my life. And the great thing about this picture is that when it was taken, nobody knew who Talking Heads were. So people would look at this picture and they'd see me, yes, that's me, and they'd say, hey Lin, who's the weird looking band with the short hair? I'd say, Talking Heads 77, Psycho Killer, don't you people know anything? And now I have a picture of that in my office, and people come in and they say, hey, who's the hippie burnout with Talking Heads? Don't you recognize me with my Q104 t-shirt, my big John Lennon glasses, and a hairstyle my mother referred to as my Veronica Lake period, an actress of the 1930s.
All right. This one, let's see.
This is my good friend Mick Jagger. He's actually smiling in that picture. This was in 1987 at the Old Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. He was releasing a solo album. Now, the best time to meet like giant rock stars is when they put out a solo album, because the solo albums are never as big a deal as their, a solo Mick Jagger album as opposed to a Rolling Stones album. So they're more likely to do promotional things, like have dinner with about 16 people at the Ambassador East. And this is when I was the music director. So I was invited and I got a picture. But the great thing is that I got to meet him again in 2001 when he released another solo album. And I was flown out to LA to interview him one-on-one for the kind of national album syndication release broadcast. So I got to spend an entire hour interviewing him one-on-one, and the Rolling Stones, really in the classic rock genre, one of my all-time favorite bands. So I was very nervous, but he was a good guest.
All right, so speaking of genres,
Yeah.
what's your favorite type? How do you decide what you're playing?
Well, the interesting thing is at XRT, XRT has embraced so many musical styles and trends over the years. In the late 1970s, XRT was the only station playing the Ramones, Talking Heads, the Police, who were considered a punk band back then. In the early 1980s, XRT was the only station playing REM and U2 and all these up-and-coming bands. In the 90s, it was Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam. So I have this vision of all this music in my life that's portioned out into almost decades. And I have favorites, in all of them. There are new bands that I love, like Arcade Fire that I saw at Lollapalooza 2 years ago. And then there are bands I grew up with, like the Rolling Stones I'm in love with. And I'm very good at loving obscure bands that nobody really cares about. at all. And one of the things I used to do as a music director to incite enthusiasm from my boss was almost every week I'd say, you've got to hear this. This is the greatest song ever written. So there are about 100 greatest songs ever written.
Yeah.
And on my show, I'll introduce the song by saying, okay, coming up next, the greatest song ever written. And then people will call and go, hey, you said that about a different song last week. There's no legal injunction that I can't say it's the greatest. Right now, it's the greatest song ever written. So I have a wide variety of musical favorites. I love acoustic 6 and 12 string Mississippi Delta blues acoustic guitar. I like the punk rock of the late 70s. I really like hearing something that's brand new that I've never heard before.
All right, so speaking of your wide love of music, what's Onyx Arty?
Onyx Arty Live from the Archives, Volume 14.
Well,
Onyx Arty is this great idea that somebody had a while ago, because we have all these artists that come in the studio, they record live, or we record some of the concerts we put on that we sponsor, and sometimes we're backstage at Lollapalooza or Pitchfork and we're rolling tape. So we get all these nice little versions of songs. Sometimes they're acoustic versions of songs that are otherwise electric. And every year we put them together on a CD. We have to talk to hundreds of lawyers because there are all these artists from different record labels. We have to talk to all the labels, and we have to get legal clearance to put the songs out. And the only way we can do that is by only printing up like 15 or 18,000 of them and saying, listen, we don't want to interfere with your merchandise, your CDs, so put out a limited number, and when they're gone, they're gone. We don't reprint them. So for a couple of weeks every December, people have a chance to buy this compendium of the last couple of years of live music. Sometimes we go way back. You know, we have on one of our Onyx Arty CDs, we have John Lee Hooker, the blues legend, Hall of Famer, in 1978 in a little bar on the north side of Chicago playing Boom Boom. And every time I hear it, it blows my mind. It blows my mind just hearing it and that it's on one of our discs. So the new one comes out tomorrow, as a matter of fact, which would be December 4th. And it'll be available for a few weeks. People get them for holiday gifts. People get them because they have every other Onyx Arty volume. This is number 14, and there's really cool stuff on there. Brandon Flowers doing a solo version of a song he did with his band. We have J.D. McPherson, a new guy that's kind of a rockabilly guy with a new song.
Uptown Sound.
You can go to 93xrt.com, and we have all of the songs listed.
All right. So let's talk about Lin's Bin.
Yes.
All right. Where did you get the idea for that?
Okay, Lin's Bin is a feature I do twice a week, and it's really more of a public radio sort of thing because it's this spoken word piece that's written and produced. It's kind of unusual on a rock and roll station to have. What happened was, and this is how most things happen at radio stations, they say, we need something to sponsor. We don't really care what it is. Well, they care. Yeah, they care. They just give us something we can sponsor. So my boss came over there, well, why don't you answer some emails? You know, Craig Ferguson answers emails on his show. But I think they thought it would be like he'd read a question, one word answer, shove it off the table. I turned it into these little radio essays that are 3-4 minutes long. And I write it, research it, write it, and then I have a guy who's worked with me for a long time that puts music behind it, puts movie clips behind it, puts television clips behind it. So during the course of a Lin's Bin on answering the question, where does the time go? You have all these references to songs about time. You have sometimes poets reading from their own poetry about time. You have classic movies with lines about time, and it's all wrapped up into a neat 4-minute package. And it's the one thing that most people ask me about, you know, because a lot of kids get trapped in their car with their parents listening to XRT, and it becomes like a bonding experience where they're actually both listening to the same thing at the same time. And I answer a lot of questions that have to do with growing up. Some of it's things I reminisce about, some of it's the experience of being in high school. I get a lot of questions, you know, from younger kids. Why is my teenage brother so nasty? You know, I'll answer a question like that. Why do girls like stupid music? I'll take that on. I'll provide an answer for that. I'll explain that every major musical trend in the history of rock and roll was forecast and anticipated by a group of girls, whether it was the Beatles or whomever.
All right. So, last question.
Yeah.
For Lin's Bin, you get the emails that people send to you. When you get them, how do you choose which ones to air?
You know what? This is going to sound too simple, but I choose the ones that I feel like I can answer. And they have to have a little meat to them. They can't be a question, who's your favorite band? Because it's, you come up with an answer. Actually, I could probably tap dance around that for a while. But it's got to be a question I haven't answered before. It's got to be something that's kind of interesting. And it's also got to be something that I think the crowd's going to be interested in. Sometimes people send me tragic emails about the loss of a parent or something, and they want me to answer, what's it like to lose a parent? I'm like, it doesn't really sound like fun Friday morning to talk about the death of your mother. Maybe
that's what Monday mornings are for, right?
That's what Monday mornings are for. But I have answered some pretty serious questions. Somebody asked me some years ago about death. I think that was one of my best Lin's Bins ever.
All right. Well, I want to thank my guest, Lin Brehmer, for being on the show today. I'm Colin Hughes. Thanks for watching.
So I said, we're here with the lead singer of a great new band called U2. This is Bono. And he said, no, it's Bono, rhymes with mono. And I occasionally play this on my show now because T.S. Eliot pointed out the wisdom of humility is endless. But during the course of the interview, I had all this faith in the world in this band that they were going to be huge. So at the end of the interview, I say to him, now make sure when you come back in a couple years and play the Glens Falls Civic Center that you'll come back and say hi. Of course, Glens Falls Civic Center was too small for them to play in a couple of years. They were playing big giant arenas.